If you think your family could never betray you, let me warn you right now. I used to think the exact same thing. I genuinely believed blood meant loyalty, that years of sacrifice meant something, and that helping the people you love would eventually come back around when you needed them most. I believed all of that, right up until the night I came home early from work and found my older brother sleeping in my bed, wearing my pajamas, while my wife stood in the kitchen pretending this was somehow a misunderstanding. Even now, saying it out loud sounds ridiculous, like the kind of fake drama people invent online for attention. But I swear to you, every insane thing I'm about to tell you actually happened. And trust me, the part about the bed is nowhere near the worst thing my brother eventually did to me. At the time, though, I had no idea my life was about to collapse. I actually thought things were finally improving for my family. 6 months earlier, my older brother Darren had shown up at my front door carrying 2 trash bags, a gym backpack, and what looked like the emotional damage of 3 separate divorces. Darren had always been the charming disaster in our family. Growing up, he could talk himself out of almost anything. Teachers loved him, women defended him, and my mother treated every bad decision he made like it was a temporary misunderstanding caused by stress. Meanwhile, I was the reliable younger brother who paid bills on time, showed up early to work, and somehow became responsible for cleaning up Darren's messes every single year of my life.
When Darren arrived at my house that night, looking exhausted and defeated, I honestly felt sorry for him. He claimed his girlfriend had thrown him out after accusing him of gambling away their rent money, but Darren swore she was exaggerating. Looking back now, I realize exaggerating was his favorite word anytime someone caught him doing something horrible. Still, he was my brother, and despite everything, I loved him. My wife Melissa even encouraged me to let him stay with us temporarily because she said family was supposed to help each other during hard times. That sentence alone should have been a warning sign from God. At first, everything seemed normal. Darren was polite, helpful, funny around the house, and strangely good with my 8-year-old son Tyler. He cooked breakfast sometimes, picked Tyler up from school when Melissa was busy, and constantly thanked us for saving his life. Honestly, there were moments when I even felt guilty for secretly expecting him to mess everything up eventually. For the first time in years, it actually seemed possible that my brother had changed. Then, small things started happening that I could not fully explain. Melissa suddenly became weirdly defensive anytime I criticized Darren, even jokingly. Tyler started comparing me to him constantly, telling me Uncle Darren was more fun, more relaxed, and less angry, even though I barely raised my voice at home.
My mother also began calling me almost daily to remind me how grateful Darren was and how proud she felt seeing both her sons finally acting like a real family again. The whole thing should have felt heartwarming, but instead it slowly started making me feel like a guest inside my own house. The first moment something truly felt wrong happened on a Thursday evening after work. I came home early because a water pipe had burst in our office building, and the second I walked into the house, I noticed how strangely quiet everything was. Tyler was at soccer practice, and Melissa's car was parked outside, but nobody answered when I called out. I remember hearing faint movement upstairs, followed by sudden silence, like somebody had accidentally made noise and frozen afterward. At first, I honestly thought somebody might have broken into the house. Then I walked into my bedroom. For a few seconds, my brain genuinely refused to process what I was looking at. Darren was asleep in my bed wearing my gray pajama pants while lying against my pillows like he had lived there his entire life. One of my t-shirts was hanging off the side of the mattress, and my side of the blanket had clearly been slept in recently. I just stood there staring at him while every possible explanation fought for survival inside my head.
maybe he was drunk? Maybe he was sick? Maybe this was somehow less insane than it looked. Then Melissa walked into the hallway behind me, carrying a laundry basket, saw the expression on my face, and immediately stopped moving. Nobody spoke for almost 5 full seconds. I remember Darren slowly opening his eyes, looking directly at me, and somehow having the confidence to look annoyed instead of embarrassed. That was the exact moment I realized something was deeply wrong in my house. Not normal family problems wrong. Not financial stress wrong. I mean the kind of wrong that permanently changes how you look at people forever. Melissa tried explaining first. She claimed Darren had hurt his back helping move furniture earlier that day, and only laid down for a few minutes because our guest room mattress was messing with his spine. The problem was that Darren had been staying with us for 6 months without once mentioning back pain, and somehow nobody could explain why he was wearing my clothes or why both sides of my bed looked slept in. The entire explanation felt so painfully rehearsed that even Tyler probably would not have believed it. What hurt most was not even Darren lying to me. Honestly, I expected dishonesty from him eventually. What destroyed me was watching my wife stand there protecting him instead of understanding why I was upset. Melissa kept acting like I was overreacting, like I had walked into some harmless misunderstanding instead of finding another grown man sleeping comfortably in my bed. The more she defended him, the more I started feeling something I had never truly felt inside my own home before. Outnumbered. That night became the beginning of the worst year of my life, because over the next several months, I would discover that my brother had not just entered my house. Slowly, carefully, and almost expertly, he had started replacing me inside my own family. And the most humiliating part is that by the time I finally understood what was happening, almost nobody believed me anymore. The morning after I found Darren in my bed was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my entire life. Nobody mentioned what had happened directly, but the tension inside the house was so thick it felt physical. Melissa moved around the kitchen pretending everything was perfectly normal, while Darren sat at the dining table drinking coffee like he had absolutely nothing to feel guilty about. What made the whole situation even more surreal was the confidence both of them carried. I kept waiting for one of them to admit the situation looked inappropriate, or at least acknowledge why I felt disturbed. But instead, they behaved like I was the one creating unnecessary drama. Darren even joked about how serious I looked that morning, which honestly made me want to throw his coffee directly into his face. I tried convincing myself I was overthinking things. That became my biggest mistake during that period of my life. Every time my instincts warned me that something felt wrong, I kept searching for reasonable explanations because I desperately wanted to believe my family was still my family. Melissa had been my wife for nearly 10 years. Darren was my brother. These were not strangers. These were people I had trusted with every vulnerable part of my life. So instead of confronting the situation aggressively, I convinced myself that exhaustion, stress, and embarrassment were distorting my judgment. Unfortunately, manipulators love reasonable people, because reasonable people keep giving them extra chances long after they deserve them. Things became worse 3 days later during dinner at my mother's house. My mother hosted family dinners almost every Sunday, and normally they were predictable, loud, and harmless. This particular dinner felt different the moment I arrived. Darren was already there, helping my mother cook in the kitchen, while Melissa laughed at something he said with the kind of relaxed smile she had not given me in weeks. Even Tyler seemed more excited to see Darren than me. The entire atmosphere felt strangely coordinated, like
everybody had unknowingly joined the same team without informing me first. At some point during dinner, my mother casually brought up the incident with the bedroom. I still remember how quickly my appetite disappeared when she looked directly at me and said, "Melissa told me you got upset over Darren resting his back for a few minutes." The way she phrased it immediately made me understand that the story had already been rewritten before I even entered the room. Darren looked down at his plate, pretending to feel awkward, while Melissa quietly avoided eye contact. Meanwhile, my mother continued speaking about how stress could make people suspicious over innocent things, and how families needed trust in order to function properly. The entire conversation was carefully designed to make me sound irrational, without directly accusing me of anything.
What shocked me most was how naturally everyone accepted that version of events. My Aunt Denise even laughed and said I had always been too serious growing up, while Tyler joked that maybe I was jealous because Uncle Darren was everybody's favorite now. Everybody laughed after he said it, except me. I remember sitting there, staring around the table, realizing that nobody seemed remotely bothered by how uncomfortable I looked. In fact, the more defensive I became, the calmer Darren acted, which only made me appear more unstable by comparison. That was the night I started noticing how expertly Darren manipulated people. He never defended himself aggressively because he did not need to. Instead, he positioned himself as the relaxed, misunderstood victim, while everybody else defended him automatically. Anytime I questioned something suspicious, Darren responded with patience and fake disappointment, like he was hurt I could think so poorly of him after everything he had been through. My mother completely fell for it. Melissa fell for it too. Even Tyler started looking at me differently whenever Darren acted wounded. Somehow, without openly attacking me, Darren slowly turned every disagreement into proof that I was becoming paranoid. The worst moment of the evening happened near the end of dinner, after my mother brought out dessert. Tyler accidentally spilled juice across the table, and before I could even react, Darren jumped up laughing and helped clean everything while joking around with him. It was such a small moment, but everybody immediately started praising Darren for being good with kids, while my mother looked directly at Melissa and said, "Some men are just naturally nurturing." The comment was subtle enough that nobody else reacted, but I noticed the way Melissa smiled afterward. That smile stayed in my head for days. Driving home that night felt unbearable. Melissa kept insisting I had embarrassed her during dinner by acting cold toward Darren, while I kept trying to explain that the situation in our bedroom still felt inappropriate no matter how anybody tried to reframe it. Instead of understanding my perspective, she became increasingly defensive and eventually accused me of being insecure. Hearing my own wife call me insecure after finding another man in our bed genuinely felt like being slapped in the face. By the time we reached home, we were barely speaking to each other. What I did not realize at the time was that Darren had already accomplished exactly what he wanted. He was not trying to steal money from me yet. He was not trying to openly destroy my marriage either. First, he needed something much more important. He needed everybody to stop trusting my instincts. Because once people start believing you are emotional, jealous, or unstable, they stop questioning the person manipulating you. And Darren understood that better than anyone I had ever known.
The hardest part of everything Darren eventually did to me was not losing money, losing trust, or even watching my marriage slowly fall apart in front of my face. The hardest part was watching my own son slowly begin to look at another man the way he used to look at me. That kind of pain is difficult to explain unless you have lived through it yourself. It does not happen all at once. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides they suddenly love someone else more than their father. Instead, it happens gradually, through hundreds of small moments that seem harmless individually, but become devastating once you finally step back and look at the entire picture. Before Darren moved into our house, Tyler and I were incredibly close. Every Saturday morning, we played basketball at the park near our neighborhood, and every Friday night, we ordered terrible pizza and watched old action movies Melissa hated. Tyler used to follow me around the house asking endless questions about everything, from how cars worked to whether sharks could survive in swimming pools. I used to joke that being his father felt like having a tiny, extremely loud best friend. Looking back now, I realize those ordinary little moments were the happiest parts of my life. At first, Darren simply acted like the fun uncle. Honestly, there was nothing suspicious about it in the beginning. He played video games with Tyler, helped him with soccer practice, and constantly bought him little gifts whenever he returned from job interviews or errands.
Tyler loved the attention immediately because Darren treated everything like an adventure. If Tyler wanted ice cream before dinner, Darren thought it was hilarious. If Tyler forgot homework, Darren called school rules overrated. Meanwhile, I was still the parent worrying about schedules, discipline, homework, and responsibilities. Without realizing it, I slowly became the boring authority figure, while Darren positioned himself as the exciting adult who never said no. The real problem started once Darren began subtly criticizing me in ways that sounded harmless on the surface. He never insulted me directly, because that would have been obvious. Instead, he used jokes, small comments, and little comparisons that slowly reshaped how Tyler saw me. If I told Tyler he could not stay up late on a school night, Darren would laugh and say something like, "Your dad has always acted 80 years old." If I got frustrated after a stressful day at work, Darren would immediately comfort Tyler afterward and quietly tell him, "Your father means well. He just takes life too seriously." Individually, those comments seemed minor. Over time, they became poisonous. Melissa did not help either. Instead of noticing what Darren was doing, she constantly praised how good he was with Tyler. She started comparing us openly without realizing how humiliating it felt. One night during dinner, she casually mentioned how Tyler seemed more relaxed around Darren lately, and everybody laughed when Tyler immediately agreed. I remember forcing a smile during that conversation while something deep inside me quietly started breaking. The first moment I truly understood how much things had changed happened during Tyler's soccer tournament that spring. I had taken time off work specifically to attend because Tyler had been excited about the game for weeks. Unfortunately, my boss forced me into an emergency meeting that morning, making me arrive halfway through the match. When I finally reached the field, I saw Darren standing near the sidelines, cheering louder than anybody else, while Tyler grinned every time he looked in his direction. I still remember jogging toward them, expecting Tyler to run over excitedly, the way he always used to whenever I arrived late somewhere. Instead, Tyler barely glanced at me. I told myself not to overreact, because children get distracted easily. But then, Tyler scored the winning goal and immediately sprinted past me, directly toward Darren. My brother lifted him into the air while everybody around them laughed and celebrated. Melissa stood nearby, recording the moment on her phone, while my mother clapped proudly from her chair. Meanwhile, I just stood there, holding the sports drink I had bought for Tyler, like some awkward stranger who had wandered into the wrong family gathering. Later that evening, things became even worse. Tyler asked whether Darren could start coaching his soccer practices, because according to him, Uncle Darren actually made sports fun. I laughed at first because I honestly thought he was joking, but Tyler kept staring at me seriously while Melissa quietly defended the idea. She explained that Darren simply connected with Tyler differently and that I should not feel threatened by it. Hearing my own wife tell me not to feel threatened while another man slowly replaced my role inside my family nearly drove me insane. That night, I confronted Darren privately in the garage while Tyler and Melissa watched television upstairs.
I tried staying calm at first, because part of me still desperately wanted to believe the situation could be fixed without destroying the entire family. I explained that I felt like he was crossing boundaries with Tyler and undermining me as a parent. But Darren responded with such convincing confusion that for a moment I actually questioned myself again. He claimed he was only trying to help while I worked long hours, and then he gave me a disappointed look that made me feel guilty for even bringing it up anyway. What happened next still makes me angry whenever I think about it. Darren placed his hand on my shoulder and quietly told me that maybe Tyler simply needed more emotional support than I knew how to provide. The way he said it sounded sympathetic instead of insulting, which somehow made it even crueler. Then he started talking about how stressed I had been lately and how everybody worried I was becoming distant from the family. Listening to my unemployed older brother psychoanalyze me inside my own garage while living off my money should have been enough to make me throw him out immediately. Instead, I stood there silently absorbing every word, because by that point, I had already started doubting myself too.
A few days later, I overheard Tyler talking to one of his friends online while playing video games in his room. I was walking past the hallway when I heard him laughing and saying, "I wish Uncle Darren was my real dad sometimes." I know he was only a child and probably did not understand how painful those words were, but I swear that sentence hit me harder than anything else during that entire year. I stood frozen outside his bedroom door, feeling like somebody had physically punched me in the chest. The most terrifying part was that Darren never looked openly guilty during any of this. He acted supportive, patient, and understanding at all times. Whenever I became frustrated, he immediately looked concerned instead of defensive, which only made me appear more unstable to everyone else. Slowly, carefully, and almost professionally, my brother had started taking control of the emotional center of my family, while I became isolated inside my own home. And the worst part was that nobody else seemed capable of seeing it happen, except me. By the time summer arrived, I had started feeling like a stranger inside my own life. Every part of my daily routine now carried this quiet tension that never fully disappeared. Darren had become so deeply integrated into our household that people outside the family genuinely assumed he lived there permanently. Neighbors waved at him like he owned the place. Tyler followed him everywhere whenever he was home. And Melissa constantly defended him before I even finished expressing concerns. Looking back now, I realize the emotional manipulation was already severe enough that I should have forced him out immediately. But at the time, I still believed things could somehow return to normal if I stayed patient long enough. The financial betrayal began so casually that I almost missed the warning signs entirely. One afternoon during work, I received a notification from my bank about unusual activity connected to my credit profile. At first, I assumed it was another annoying fraud alert because banks constantly send dramatic messages over harmless purchases. Still, something about the wording bothered me enough that I decided to call during my lunch break. I remember sitting alone inside my office, staring out the window while the customer service representative politely informed me there was an active loan under my name connected to nearly $30,000 in debt. At first, I genuinely thought they had the wrong account. I explained calmly that I had never applied for any loan, but the representative sounded confused because, according to their records, the paperwork had been completed months earlier. She even confirmed my address, social security number, employment information, and signature. Every detail matched perfectly. Hearing someone calmly describe fraudulent debt attached to my identity felt surreal, almost like listening to a story about another person's life instead of my own. The moment she mentioned the date the loan was approved, my stomach dropped instantly. It happened only 3 weeks after Darren moved into our house. I left work early that afternoon and drove directly to the bank while trying not to panic. The entire situation felt impossible because Darren barely understood how online banking worked. Yet somehow a massive loan now existed under my name without my knowledge. Part of me desperately wanted there to be some innocent explanation. But deep down, I already knew exactly where this was heading. When the bank manager finally showed me the paperwork in person, the truth became impossible to ignore. Somebody had forged my signature almost perfectly, used my personal information, and listed my income details accurately enough to avoid suspicion during approval. Then I saw the emergency contact listed on the application. Melissa. That was the moment my hands started shaking.
I remember sitting there in complete silence while the bank manager kept explaining legal procedures and fraud investigations, but honestly, I barely heard anything after that. All I could think about was how my wife's phone number somehow ended up connected to a secret loan I never authorized. I wanted to believe there had to be some misunderstanding, because accepting the obvious explanation felt unbearable. If Melissa knew about the loan, then this was not just Darren manipulating the family anymore. This was something much uglier. I drove home in complete silence, trying to decide whether I should confront Melissa immediately or gather more information first. Unfortunately, the moment I walked through the front door, I found Darren sitting comfortably on the couch eating takeout food while Tyler laughed beside him during a video game. The sight instantly filled me with so much anger that I had to physically stop myself from reacting emotionally in front of my son. Darren immediately noticed something was wrong and asked whether I had a bad day at work. The casualness of the question made me even angrier because I suddenly realized how confidently he moved through my life now. He no longer acted like a guest in my house. He acted like somebody who knew he belonged there more than I did.
I told Tyler to go upstairs because I needed to speak privately with Darren and Melissa. The atmosphere changed immediately after Tyler left the room. Melissa walked in from the kitchen, looking nervous before I even explained the situation, which told me everything I needed to know. I placed the loan paperwork on the table and asked a very simple question. I asked whether either of them wanted to explain why my wife was listed as the emergency contact on a fraudulent $30,000 loan under my name. The silence that followed felt endless. Melissa looked at Darren first. That tiny movement changed everything for me, because innocent people do not look at each other like that unless they are trying to decide which lie to use. Darren finally spoke first, and unbelievably, he tried pretending the situation was not serious. He claimed he had only borrowed the money temporarily because he was trying to get back on his feet after losing his apartment. According to him, he fully intended to repay everything before I ever noticed. The more he talked, the angrier I became, because he sounded less like somebody apologizing and more like somebody frustrated at getting caught. Then Melissa admitted she knew about the loan. I honestly cannot describe the feeling that hit me in that moment. Up until then, part of me still believed my marriage could survive everything else happening inside the house. But hearing my wife calmly admit that she helped my brother take out secret debt under my identity shattered something in me permanently. Melissa immediately tried defending herself by claiming Darren had been desperate and emotionally unstable at the time. She insisted they only hid it from me because they knew I would overreact, which might be the most insulting excuse anybody has ever given me in my life. They had literally committed fraud using my name, and somehow I was still being treated like the unreasonable person for getting upset about it? What made the entire argument even more disturbing was how naturally Darren manipulated the conversation once I became emotional. The louder I got, the calmer he became. He kept talking slowly,
rationally and sympathetically, while Melissa focused entirely on my anger instead of the actual crime they committed. At one point, Darren even suggested we all sit down peacefully to discuss solutions, like he was some kind of therapist mediating family tension, instead of the man who stole my identity. Then, my mother arrived. To this day, I still have no idea who called her. The second she walked inside, Melissa immediately started crying while Darren sat quietly, pretending to feel ashamed. Meanwhile, I looked furious, because I was furious. Unfortunately, manipulative people always understand one important truth. Whoever looks calmer usually appears more believable. Within 10 minutes, my mother had somehow turned the entire situation into a discussion about compassion, forgiveness, and family loyalty. Darren admitted what he did was technically wrong, but insisted he had been desperate, while Melissa explained they intended to fix everything eventually. My mother then looked directly at me and asked whether I truly wanted to destroy the family over money. Money. That word nearly made me lose my mind. Because the loan was never just about money. It was about betrayal. It was about discovering that the people closest to me had secretly worked together behind my back, while still expecting me to provide the home, the stability, and the income keeping everybody comfortable.
That night, after hours of arguing, my mother convinced everyone that the best solution was for Darren to remain in the house temporarily while he sorted out repayment. Looking back now, I genuinely cannot believe I allowed that conversation to happen. But by then, months of manipulation had already exhausted me emotionally. Every time I defended myself, I somehow became the villain of the discussion. The most painful moment came later that night, after everybody finally went to sleep. I walked downstairs for water and accidentally overheard Tyler asking Darren whether everything was okay. Darren gave this soft little laugh and told him not to worry because grown-ups fight sometimes. Then Tyler asked the question that completely broke my heart. "Are you leaving?" And Darren answered quietly, "Not if I can help it." After discovering the secret loan, something inside me permanently changed. Up until that point, I had still been trying to save my marriage, protect my relationship with Tyler, and convince myself Darren's manipulation had somehow gotten out of control naturally. But once I realized Melissa had knowingly participated in fraud against me, I stopped viewing the situation as family dysfunction and started seeing it for what it actually was. My own home had become an environment where loyalty only existed when it benefited everyone, except me. The strange thing about betrayal is that your mind starts replaying old memories differently once the truth finally begins surfacing. Suddenly, conversations that once sounded harmless begin feeling sinister. Small moments you ignored before suddenly look calculated. I started remembering how defensive Melissa became any time I criticized Darren, how often she dismissed my instincts, and how quickly she framed me as paranoid whenever I questioned something suspicious. The more I reflected on the previous months, the more I realized I had been manipulated so gradually that I barely noticed my own authority disappearing inside my family. For several days after the argument about the loan, Melissa barely spoke to me unless Tyler was nearby. Whenever we were alone together, she acted emotionally exhausted, almost annoyed that I still seemed upset about the situation. Meanwhile, Darren behaved with unbearable calmness around the house, constantly offering to help with chores, joking with Tyler, and thanking me for giving him another chance. His confidence started terrifying me, because normal people feel uncomfortable after getting caught committing fraud against family members. Darren somehow behaved even more relaxed afterward, almost like surviving the confrontation made him stronger. The moment everything truly collapsed happened on a Friday evening after work.
I had stayed late finishing reports because, honestly, being at the office felt less stressful than going home. Around 8 o'clock, one of my coworkers invited me to dinner at a restaurant downtown where several people from the company were meeting for drinks. Normally, I would have declined immediately because I was emotionally exhausted, but that night I desperately wanted distraction. Unfortunately, that decision ended up changing my entire life. About halfway through dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom and nearly stopped walking when I passed the private dining section near the back of the restaurant. Sitting together in a corner booth illuminated by candlelight were Melissa and Darren. At first, I genuinely thought I must be misunderstanding what I was seeing because the entire scene looked too intimate to explain away naturally. Melissa was laughing softly, while Darren leaned toward her with the kind of relaxed confidence married couples develop after years together. Then I noticed his hand resting on top of hers. I cannot fully describe what that moment felt like emotionally. It was not explosive anger at first. Honestly, it felt more like watching the final piece of a puzzle slide into place against your will. Deep down, I think part of me had already known something inappropriate was happening for months, but seeing them together like that destroyed the last remaining part of my denial. Neither of them noticed me standing there initially. I remember just staring at them from several feet away, while every memory from the previous year replayed itself differently inside my head. Every argument Melissa started whenever I questioned Darren, every time Tyler compared me unfavorably to him, every moment my instincts warned me something felt wrong, only for everyone around me to act like I was unstable. Suddenly, all of it made sense, in the worst possible way. Then Melissa looked up and saw me. The expression on her face changed instantly from relaxed happiness to complete panic. Darren turned around seconds later, and for the first time since moving into my house, he actually looked nervous. Nobody spoke for several moments because, honestly, there was nothing left to explain anymore. The entire situation was sitting right there in front of us. I walked toward the table slowly while trying to control myself because a large part of me genuinely wanted to drag Darren across the restaurant floor. Instead, I asked the simplest question possible. I asked how long it had been happening. Melissa immediately started crying, while Darren began talking about misunderstandings, emotional confusion, and complex feelings, which might have been the most insulting phrase I had ever heard in my life. What shocked me most was not discovering the affair itself. By that point, emotionally, I think I had already prepared myself for something terrible. What truly destroyed me was learning how long everyone had been lying directly to my face. Melissa admitted the relationship with Darren started emotionally months earlier, not physically at first, according to her, although honestly I no longer believed anything either of them said. She claimed they connected naturally while supporting each other during stressful times, which sounded like the kind of nonsense people say when they want betrayal to sound romantic instead of disgusting. Then Darren said something I will never forget. He told me none of this would have happened if I had been more emotionally available as a husband. Even now, thinking about that sentence makes my blood pressure rise. The man who stole money using my identity, manipulated my son, and slept with my wife somehow still positioned himself as morally superior. And the worst part was that Melissa did not even argue with him. She just sat there crying while allowing him to blame me for the destruction they caused together. I eventually left the restaurant before I completely lost control of myself publicly. I don't even remember driving home afterward because my mind felt numb. Everything around me suddenly looked fake, almost unreal, like I had spent the last year accidentally living inside someone else's nightmare. When I finally reached the house, Tyler was asleep upstairs, while my mother sat in the living room waiting for me. That alone told me Melissa and Darren had already contacted her first. The second she saw my face, She started talking about forgiveness before I even said a word. She admitted Melissa had confessed the relationship earlier that evening because they were trying to figure things out responsibly. Responsibly. Hearing my mother describe my wife sleeping with my brother as trying to figure things out responsibly nearly made me laugh from pure disbelief. Then came the final betrayal. My mother told me quietly that maybe Melissa and Darren made more sense together because they understood each other emotionally in ways I never fully understood either of them. I remember staring at her in complete silence while realizing something horrifying. My brother had not only taken control of my house and my marriage, somehow unbelievably, he had convinced my own family that I deserved it. That was the night I finally stopped trying to save everyone else. And for the first time in nearly a year, I started thinking seriously about revenge.
A month after I discovered Melissa and Darren's affair, my grandmother died unexpectedly in her sleep. Under normal circumstances, losing her would have completely shattered me emotionally, because she had always been the one person in the family who treated me with genuine kindness growing up. Unfortunately, by the time the funeral arrived, the entire family had become so divided and emotionally toxic that even grief itself felt complicated. Everybody spent more time avoiding awkward conversations than actually mourning properly. By then, Melissa had officially moved out of the house and into a downtown apartment that Darren somehow helped her afford, despite still owing thousands under my name. Tyler split time between both homes, although lately it felt like he preferred being around them instead of me. Every exchange involving my son now carried this horrible artificial politeness that made everything feel even more painful. Melissa acted like we were mature adults navigating a difficult transition, while Darren constantly tried behaving respectfully around me in public, as if sleeping with my wife had simply been an unfortunate scheduling conflict. The funeral took place at the same church my family had attended for nearly 20 years. Walking inside that building felt surreal because I suddenly realized how many fake smiles and hidden betrayals existed beneath the surface of the people surrounding me. Relatives hugged me warmly while whispering sympathy, but half of them had already chosen Darren's side privately weeks earlier. Some believed Melissa and Darren were meant to be together, while others treated the entire affair like an unfortunate but understandable consequence of my supposed emotional distance as a husband. It amazed me how quickly people rewrote history once a charismatic manipulator gave them a comfortable narrative to believe in. The atmosphere became unbearable almost immediately after the service started. Darren sat beside my mother in the front pew, while Melissa sat only a few seats away wearing black and quietly dabbing tears from her eyes. From a distance, they looked like grieving family members supporting each other during tragedy. Only I knew they had spent months destroying my life behind closed doors while convincing everyone else I was the unstable one. Every time somebody approached Darren to offer comfort or praise him for being strong for the family, I felt physically sick. The real disaster started after the funeral service ended during the reception in the church hall. Families stood around eating casseroles and exchanging awkward conversations, while children ran between tables completely unaware of the emotional warfare happening around them. I spent most of the afternoon isolated near the coffee station because, honestly, I no longer trusted myself to interact normally with anyone there. That was when my cousin Rebecca quietly approached me, looking nervous.
Rebecca had always been different from the rest of the family. Unlike my mother, she never automatically defended Darren's behavior growing up. She was one of the few people who occasionally questioned his stories instead of blindly accepting them. The moment I saw the expression on her face, I knew something was wrong. She asked whether we could speak privately, outside. I still remember standing behind the church near the parking lot while cold wind moved through the trees, and Rebecca struggled to decide how to start the conversation. Eventually, she admitted she had overheard Darren arguing with Melissa several nights earlier while helping my mother organize funeral arrangements. According to her, the argument became intense because Darren accused Melissa of hiding things from him financially. At first, I barely reacted, because by that point, dishonesty from either of them no longer surprised me. Then Rebecca mentioned a second name. A man named Victor Hale.
The name immediately sounded familiar, although I could not remember why at first. Rebecca explained she overheard Darren accusing Melissa of still communicating secretly with Victor, despite promising to stop. The moment she said that, everything inside me suddenly tightened because I finally remembered exactly who Victor Hale was. Victor was my former business partner. 3 years earlier, Victor and I attempted launching a small logistics company together before the business failed catastrophically after money mysteriously disappeared from our startup account. At the time, Victor blamed me, while I blamed him, and the entire situation destroyed both our friendship and the company itself. Melissa had acted devastated back then because she knew how much losing the business affected me emotionally. She spent months comforting me while I struggled financially afterward. Now, suddenly, standing outside my grandmother's funeral, I was learning my wife somehow had a secret connection to Victor T. Rebecca admitted she did not know details, but she clearly felt guilty enough about overhearing the conversation that she believed I deserved the truth. Before I could ask more questions, the church door suddenly opened behind us, and Darren stepped outside.
The second he saw us together, his expression changed completely. It happened fast, but I noticed it immediately. For the first time since all of this started, Darren looked genuinely afraid. Rebecca quickly made an excuse and walked back inside, leaving me alone with him near the parking lot. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Darren simply stared at me while trying to regain control of himself emotionally. Then he asked what Rebecca told me. Not, what were you discussing? Not, is everything okay? He specifically asked what she told me. That single sentence confirmed everything. I asked him directly whether Melissa had been involved with Victor Hale during the collapse of my company years earlier. Darren immediately denied it, but his denial came too fast and sounded too rehearsed. Then he started rambling about misunderstandings, old mistakes, and how digging into the past would only create more pain for everyone involved. Listening to him panic that visibly for the first time made me realize something important. There were still secrets I did not know, and whatever those secrets were, Darren was terrified I might uncover them. The confrontation ended abruptly when Tyler suddenly appeared outside looking for Darren, because apparently my own son now instinctively searched for my brother instead of me whenever he needed something. Watching Tyler walk naturally toward the man who had helped destroy our family triggered something cold inside me emotionally. Darren immediately softened his tone around him, smiling warmly and placing a hand on his shoulder like some heroic protector shielding him from conflict. That was the exact moment I made my decision. Until then, I had spent months reacting emotionally while Darren controlled the narrative around me. I kept trying to defend myself, explain myself, and save relationships that were already poisoned beyond repair. But standing there outside my grandmother's funeral, watching my brother play loving family man beside the ruins of my marriage, I finally understood something clearly. People like Darren survive because everyone else keeps behaving morally around them. That night, for the first time in my life, I stopped caring about being the better person. And once that happened, everything began changing very quickly.
By the time I stopped loving them, revenge became easy. That was the part nobody ever tells you about betrayal. People imagine revenge comes from rage, screaming, or emotional explosions. But the truly dangerous moment happens when the victim becomes emotionally calm. Once I stopped trying to save my marriage, protect my brother, or earn my mother's approval, I started seeing all of them clearly for the first time in my life. Darren was not some misunderstood man who made bad choices. He was a parasite who survived by attaching himself to people willing to love him sincerely. Melissa was not confused or emotionally neglected. She was selfish enough to destroy anyone who made her life easier. And my mother, despite all her tears and speeches about family loyalty, was the reason Darren became the kind of man who believed consequences only happened to other people. After uncovering the financial records connected to my old company, I stopped confronting them emotionally altogether. That surprised everyone because they mistook silence for weakness. Melissa actually started acting more relaxed around me during those final weeks because she thought I had finally accepted the situation. Darren became even more arrogant. He started spending money openly again, posting photographs online, taking Tyler to expensive restaurants, and behaving like he had somehow won my entire life. Looking back now, those were probably the happiest weeks of his existence because he genuinely believed he escaped consequences permanently. Meanwhile, I quietly destroyed him piece by piece.
My attorney helped reopen the investigation into my failed business with Victor Hale. Once forensic accountants examined the transactions properly, the evidence became catastrophic almost immediately. Melissa had moved money through fake vendor accounts, while Darren redirected portions into gambling payments and hidden personal accounts. Worse still, the fraudulent loan under my identity connected directly back to Darren's devices and Melissa's banking records. What started as a private family disaster suddenly became an actual criminal investigation involving fraud, identity theft, financial conspiracy, and tax violations. And I made absolutely sure nobody could protect them this time. The family reconciliation dinner at my mother's house ended up becoming the beginning of their public destruction. I waited until everyone finished eating before placing the evidence on the table in front of them. At first, Darren still tried smiling confidently because he assumed he could manipulate the conversation like always. But the moment he saw official legal documents instead of emotional accusations, the color drained from his face completely. Melissa started shaking almost immediately, while my mother kept insisting there had to be some misunderstanding because apparently denial was the only survival skill she ever mastered. Then I told them the police already had copies. I will never forget the silence that followed.
Darren actually laughed at first, because narcissistic people always believe consequences are temporary inconveniences meant for weaker people. He accused me of bluffing and claimed no jury would care about family mistakes. Then I showed him the messages, the bank records, the transfers, the deleted emails Victor recovered. One message in particular completely destroyed him emotionally because it showed Darren joking about how predictably forgiving I was after stealing from me years earlier. Melissa started crying hysterically once she realized the investigation extended far beyond the affair itself. My mother still defended him. Even then. Even after seeing proof her son committed fraud against his own family, she immediately turned toward me and asked how I could do this to my brother. That sentence honestly changed something inside me permanently. I realized she would rather watch me destroyed forever than admit Darren deserved consequences. She had spent her entire life protecting him from accountability while expecting everyone else to absorb the damage quietly. So I destroyed her too. Calmly. Completely.
I informed everyone at the table that investigators had already discovered my mother helped Darren hide financial records months earlier after receiving collection notices connected to his debts. She had allowed documents to be redirected through her address and knowingly lied during preliminary questioning to protect him. The second she realized her own involvement carried legal consequences, the panic on her face became almost unrecognizable. For the first time in my life, my mother looked afraid of Darren instead of protective over him. That was the moment the family truly collapsed. Melissa began blaming Darren immediately to protect herself. Darren responded by exposing private conversations, proving Melissa knowingly participated in everything from the beginning. My mother started screaming that both of them ruined her life while simultaneously begging me to fix this before authorities became more aggressive publicly. Watching the three people who spent nearly a year manipulating me suddenly turn against each other the second consequences appeared was honestly one of the most satisfying moments of my entire life. Tyler witnessed part of the argument before I sent him upstairs, but unfortunately the damage had already been done. For months, Darren carefully positioned himself as the fun, trustworthy adult, while I looked paranoid and emotional by comparison. Now my son stood in the hallway, watching the same man scream at his grandmother, while threatening Melissa for cooperating with investigators. The admiration disappeared from Tyler's face instantly. Children forgive flaws easily, but they never forget discovering somebody they trusted was fundamentally fake. Everything after that happened incredibly fast. Melissa lost her job first because the fraud investigation became public once charges were officially filed. Friends disappeared almost overnight. People who once praised her relationship with Darren suddenly acted disgusted by both of them. The apartment they shared became impossible to afford once their accounts froze during the investigation, and the relationship immediately collapsed under pressure, because manipulative people only function well when targeting somebody else together. Once survival became difficult, they turned on each other viciously. Darren's downfall became spectacular. Investigators uncovered years of hidden debts, gambling problems, fraudulent accounts, and forged signatures connected to multiple victims beyond just me. Apparently, I was not even the first person he exploited financially. I was simply the family member naive enough to trust him longest. During the trial, prosecutors presented messages, bank transfers, and witness testimony showing Darren intentionally manipulated relatives emotionally while committing financial crimes behind the scenes. Watching his lawyer desperately try reframing him as troubled instead of criminal almost made me laugh. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in prison. 7. I still remember Darren turning toward me after hearing the sentence like he genuinely expected sympathy from me somehow. Even then, after everything he destroyed, part of him still believed family loyalty should save him from consequences. I just stared back silently while officers placed handcuffs around his wrists and escorted him away in front of reporters. Melissa suffered differently. Once Darren went to prison, she became publicly attached to every horrible thing they did together. Nobody trusted her anymore. Employers rejected her constantly after background checks exposed the investigation. Former friends avoided her calls. Even some relatives stopped speaking to her entirely because she helped destroy multiple lives while pretending to be the victim publicly. About a year later, I heard she moved into a tiny apartment across the state, working temporary jobs under heavy debt. Honestly, I never bothered confirming whether the rumors were true, because by then, I genuinely stopped caring whether she survived comfortably or not. My mother's ending was the ugliest. She avoided prison through a plea agreement because of her age and lack of direct financial gain, but socially, emotionally, and psychologically, her life collapsed completely. Once the full story became public, relatives stopped viewing her as the loving mother protecting her son.
and started seeing her as the woman who enabled a criminal for decades while sacrificing everyone else around him. She lost friendships, church connections, family respect, and eventually even her own health deteriorated from stress and humiliation. The woman who once lectured me endlessly about forgiveness spent the rest of her life isolated inside the consequences she helped create. And the strangest part, not once did I feel guilty. People love pretending revenge leaves victims empty inside. But honestly, watching accountability finally destroy the people who betrayed me felt peaceful in a way forgiveness never could. For nearly a year, they treated my kindness like weakness and my loyalty like something disposable. They stole my marriage, manipulated my child, destroyed my finances, rewrote my reputation, and expected me to quietly survive the humiliation afterward. Instead, I survived long enough to watch every single thing they built together collapse directly on top of them. And unlike them, I never looked away from the damage I caused.
After everything that happened, I spent a long time asking myself one question over and over again. What hurts more? Betrayal from enemies or betrayal from the people you would have destroyed yourself trying to protect? Honestly, I still do not know the answer. What I do know is this. Some people will smile in your face, eat at your table, live in your house, and still quietly resent the fact that you trusted them completely. And sometimes the most dangerous people are not strangers. Sometimes they are the people who know exactly how good your heart is and decide to use it against you anyway. But I want to ask you something before we end this story. If you were in my position, would you have exposed your own family the way I did? Or would you have walked away and let karma handle them eventually? And be honest, do you think Darren deserved prison? Or did I go too far once revenge became personal? I genuinely want to know, because stories like this divide people completely. And I already know the comment section is going to be a battlefield. Also, tell me the exact moment you realized Darren and Melissa were guilty, because I know some of you probably figured it out way earlier than I did. Was it the bedroom situation, the loan, the way Melissa kept defending him? Or did you still think I was overreacting at first? I read a lot of your comments, and honestly, some of you notice details even I miss while writing these stories. And if this story kept you hooked all the way to the end, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with somebody who loves dramatic betrayal stories. Because trust me, there are even crazier ones coming next. Most importantly, comment below, because I really want to hear what you would have done differently if your own brother tried stealing your entire life.